So, good evening. It's another Friday night of the Dusty Feet. It's 20th of October. Holy moly. Almost done with October. So, tonight, as you can tell, talk about the covenants. Interesting video that Olive Beta posted. So, I figured we'd chat about it, have some fun, yes? But don't forget, in the description below, are links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here in the Dusty Feet. Want to make sure any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, learning we do here does not happen. And don't forget to click to subscribe, hit the bell icon. Got any questions? Go to TheDustyFeet.com. And as always on the Dusty Feet, though, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go with some more branches on the vine, the Bible Project, on the Dusty Feet. You know, I really do love it when the folks at the Bible Project give us videos to start discussions. Tim Mackie, John Collins are willing to bring us challenges just to think through. These are meant just to get the motor started, to get us talking, right? So this should be fun. So much to muddle through. So let's watch the video first, then we can get chatting. So let's enjoy the Bible Project's covenants.
If you've been around Christians, you've probably heard of the idea of having a personal relationship with God, which could mean different things in the Bible, like having God as a friend, or your father, or maybe your teacher.
But there's one particular way that the Bible talks about this relationship that you find all over. But strangely, we don't talk about it that much. And that's the idea of a partnership with God.
A partnership like working alongside someone to accomplish a goal together.
Right, and this is actually what you see at the beginning of the Bible. God creates this good world full of all of this potential. And then God appoints these unique creatures, humans, as His partners in bringing more and more goodness out of all that potential.
But the humans don't want to partner with God. They rebel and try to create a world on their own terms.
And so this broken partnership is the Bible's explanation for why we're stuck in a world of corruption and injustice and the tragedy of death.
It's not like there's just one or two humans who have bailed on this relationship. In the story of the Bible, everyone has abandoned the partnership with God.
So what God does is select a smaller group of people out of the many, and He makes a new partnership with them called a covenant. And in a covenant, God makes promises and then in exchange asks His partner to fulfill certain commitments. And the purpose of all of this is to somehow use this covenant relationship to renew His partnership with everybody else.
Now, there are actually 4 times in the Old Testament that we're told God initiates a covenant relationship with Noah, Abraham, the nation of Israel, and King David.
And it's through these that God is forming a covenant family into which all people will eventually be invited.
So let's see how these work. The first one is with Noah.
So in this story, God has just brought the flood to cleanse the world of humanity's corruption, and Noah and his family are the only ones left. And so God makes a covenant with Noah, saying, listen, I know that humans will continue to be evil, but despite that, I'm not going to destroy it like this again. Instead, the earth will be this reliable place for us to work together.
Great. So what does Noah have to do?
Nothing. And that's what's so interesting about this first covenant, is that God is promising to be faithful, even though He knows humans won't be.
The next time we see God make a covenant is with a man named Abraham. God chooses him, promises to bless him, give him a large family, lots of land where they can flourish.
And in return, God asks Abraham to trust Him and train up his family to do what is right and just. And the whole reason for this covenant is God says that somehow he's going to bring his blessing to all families of the world through this one family.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
That's the covenant with Israel. The last covenant is with King David.
Yeah, the tribe of Israel has become this large nation ruled by David. And God asked David and his descendants to partner with him by leading Israel in obeying the laws and doing what is right and just. And God promises that one day, one of David's sons will come and extend God's kingdom of peace and blessing over all the nations.
So those are the 4 covenants that God makes in order to restore his partnership with the whole world.
But here's what happens. Israel breaks the covenant. They worship other gods, they allow horrible injustice, and so they lose their land and are forced off into exile.
So it seems hopeless. But during this time, Israel's prophets talked about a day when God would restore these covenants in spite of Israel's failure, somehow.
Yeah, they called it the New Covenant. And this is actually what's so interesting about Jesus, is that he's introduced into this story as the one who fulfills all of these covenant relationships. We're told that he's from the family of Abraham, and so he will bring the blessings of that family to the whole world. We're told that he's the faithful Israelite who was able to truly obey the law. And we're told that he's the king from the line of David, and so he goes about extending God's kingdom of justice and peace to all.
And that's really remarkable for one guy.
Yeah, and what it highlights is perhaps the most surprising claim of all made about this man, that Jesus is no mere human, but rather God become human. And God did this in order to be that faithful covenant partner that we are all made to be, but have failed to be. And so through Jesus, God has opened up a way for anyone to be in a renewed partnership with him.
So Jesus calls people to follow him and become part of this new covenant family.
And despite their failures, Jesus is committed to making them into partners who are becoming more and more faithful.
The story of the Bible ends with a vision of a fully renewed world, full of goodness and peace.
And there's this renewed humanity there, partnering together with God to expand the goodness of his creation. And so the end of the Bible story is really a new beginning.
I like those guys. So it seems we can probably chat about this for hours, days, weeks, months, years, right? So we'll probably just take a nibble at a few things to get our creative minds thinking and see how we're challenged, okay? So let's start with a stretcher right off the bat. Is the Bible finished? That is, of its... okay, so that's kind of an open-ended question. So let's narrow a few ground thoughts. Not ground rules, but thoughts, okay? So let's first think of the Bible as, or not as a closed book. These pages wrapped up in a leather-bound chronicle, okay? Let's start with the thought process. Actually, very akin to what the folks at the Bible Project like to say. It's a story that all leads to Jesus, okay? So, I agree that it all does lead to and surround him as the Messiah. And I might add, that is also for the Messiah for all of mankind. And that is the result of the first visit. Okay? But still, we can enjoy a bit of context stretching, okay? It seems that the story, taken from the pages in that leather-bound book, that the story is not finished yet, that it's still an active story. Let me explain. What we have is a series of scrolls, starting with the Torah, and depending on which leather-bound tome you're using, it seems to end with a scroll, a book, called The Revelation to John the Apostle from Yeshua and delivered by a messenger. Or as we like to call it, the Book of Revelations. What we have in between Genesis and Revelation are this series of stories about the interactions between God and man. As Rabbi Abraham Heschel says, God in search of man. We have a story that starts at the beginning of time, as we seem to know it. Our origins as being created by God to be in relationship with Him and to be in community. We see a series of what Tim and John say are failures of the relationship on the relationship front, right? These would include the covenants. These stories are lived out through millennium, and there are many repetitive patterns, some of which the characters are switched, some inverted, different events sometimes within those patterns. So some of the patterns in this failure to stay in relationship, to not be loyal in the covenant, this adulterous bride, okay? I tend to choose a different faceted view to these stories and maybe take on a longer term view on some. We have a penchant for short-sightedness, and that really hasn't seemed to change a lot, has it? So I'll choose not to say failures, but endings to stories that might have been different as a result of different choices, including reconciliation, that reunited bride. Let me tell you why I choose to take this perspective. If we take the path that the Bible, as in a series of stories that all eventually point to Messiah in full context, and the last scroll, that last letter, has not played out yet, it would seem that we're still in the story. Let's not forget that there was about 400 years between the last prophet in the scrolls and the Messiah comes into the picture for his first visit. The scripture's known for significant gaps in times between stories. This is just how it plays. So it seems we're in the gap between the last letters from those post-Yeshua community authors, right? And the events that are foretold in the Revelation to John. So just like the gap in the time between the prophets and Yeshua's first visit, and let's not miss the connected pattern that John is also a prophet in this accounting. So we're in this gap between the prophet and the second visit. That visit's going to be very different, okay? Okay, so now a perspective seems to be sliding into position that we're not viewers on the outside, but real, live, actual participants in the ongoing stories, the interactions between God and man. And it's our turn now to live out, to tell the tale. So now, if one is a character in the stories, and from what we've been reading, we might be able to, just maybe, probably a big maybe, that where we might be in a cyclic or repetitive pattern, if only maybe that we're looking back and saying, oh, that was the moment right there behind me, okay? So maybe if we have this valid perspective of we are in the story, then that also goes along with we are them and they are us, right? So now let's look at the relationships, the interactions with God, and the relationships and interactions with Yeshua, and see where they meet. So covenants. So the guys mentioned 4 of them, right? Noah, Abraham, Israel, and David. That's what they called them. And they capped it at those, as in, like it completed the stack. But I'll put up for debate and discussion. So let's keep the pattern going, right? Let's add Yeshua, okay? The Messiah. So I say there are 5. And how they are connected and intertwined, this should play out. And then again, maybe if we look at the elements of each, we might see some common threads, strings that might connect each. I personally, for a myriad of reasons, right, believe that they are all parts of a whole, that they build on and need the previous in order to be complete. They are parts of the whole. You need to have them all in order to be complete. So maybe we're not looking at the covenants in the perspective of Jesus fulfilled, thus ending any covenant. But maybe what Yeshua did was show us what our part could look like, and at a level of wholeness, a continued covenant. So look at them might help us see the whole elephant. I might want to explain that statement. Short version. There's a story of 6 blind men who are asked to describe an elephant. Each perspective, spear, fan, wall, rope, tree, snake, they're all valid perspectives to each blind man, each describing what they feel to be accurate. Let's leave right off to the side for a moment, okay? So one could surmise that if each of the blind men were moved around the elephant, that they might even see, that's probably a bad choice of words, see another perspective. Then maybe, as each blind man was moved around the elephant, the whole elephant, the intended view, might come into focus. Focus, again, probably a poor choice of words. But it's only in the shifting, multifaceted perspectives, the views, that might give an opportunity, to see the whole. Okay. So now with these covenants, and the graphic that they had also did a good job of, they stacked them, that they were connected. The picture actually reminded me of a beehive. I don't know why. It's the way it hit me, the beehives. But what we had was commitments and promises. Nice tie. But just like the repetitive patterns that we see in Scripture, they might have a different look to some of the patterns, right? Covenant 1, Noah. So I have, go figure, a different view on this covenant. I believe that both elements are there, commitments and promises. Let's keep a perspective. This is an extremely, extremely traumatic event. This is a global devastation event, our worst nightmare. everyone and everything is destroyed in 40 days, except for Noah and his family. Okay, well, along with those animals that God did use to start over again repopulating the earth, right? Happened to be in the boat. If we were to emerge from our bunker and saw what he saw, the best we can envision, right? That we would probably be pretty shook up too. This is a powerful, catastrophic event, and God wants and needs to reassure Noah that this type of event will not happen again. So this is the first covenant where God does a lot in both sides. However, I do want to make a side thought that we might have a commitment from Noah before, because that promise in there, Noah commits and builds the boat. Right? So let's keep that in mind, right? But God commits himself, right? When Noah gets off the boat, he's commits himself back to mankind. And one of those, whatever else happens, he will not repeat this mode of devastation. He is again committed to mankind, right? And then his promise will be witnessed by every generation to follow. Every. Those in a relationship with God or not. All will see the rainbow. That promise, every single person will see. So, covenant 1, Noah. God does do both elements, although we'll bite that Noah committed to building the ark early. So I'll bite there. But the major impetus is on God, for sure. Covenant 2, Abraham. What do we see here? Promise. So God selects a chosen. Not unlike Noah. He chooses Abraham and commits to bless him and his family, and that family will in turn bless the entire world. It's a pretty steep commitment. Big promise here. And one can say maybe that it will never be seen it will be unseen by the original recipient, okay? He will never see that promise played out. But especially that his family would go, so let's go short side on that. He'll never see the long version. The short side was, Abraham has no family. He only has Sarah. So we have an unseen promise, but there needs to be more seen promises made as well. Since that is not in the current picture. In other words, promise me a lineage, I don't have a lin to have an age for, okay? Abraham, in this covenant, will need to commit to raise his family, the one that does not exist yet, right, in the ways of God, as he knows him, and to stay committed to the covenant, to this covenant that God makes with him. Okay, his job is to ensure that he passes to his kid, that his kid passes to his kid, and so on and so on. So the next promise seen, because this one will support the faith in the larger unseen, right? Yeah, you have to get a family first. So we know the story. Abraham tries to work it out in the customary way, the way it's been done for many, many years, especially in that culture, that if your wife didn't produce an heir, then you'd find a surrogate to keep the lineage alive. But if Abraham is really going to stay committed to this covenant and convince his lineage to do the same, God does the promise his way. And then we start the direct lineage of the Messiah with a miraculous birth. It's not a virgin birth, but one that only God could do anyways. This helped to show Abraham his sincerity in the commitment, his seen promise, the promise that was seen, to support the unseen. And I might bring up that Abraham seems already fairly committed to God in the beginning. He is called righteous by God before this whole covenant even commences. So that's a good start. But are there any hiccups and stumbles along the way? You bet. Did you bring your mirror? It would seem, at first blush anyways, that perfection, that very Greek Western word, right, is not really part of this equation. But commitment with promises seem to be pretty fundamental. Covenant 2, Abraham. He did his part. God kept his part. And still, this one is still pretty shifted towards God. Most will fall on him since, except for the birth of Isaac, the rest of the covenant will never be realized by Abraham at all. And one could even argue probably that it's not even really even conceptualized. This would even play out until we get to Moses, right? So we're well down that road. Let's not lose sight. Again, probably a poor choice of words since we are the blind men, right? That this covenant is still very much active today. Now we're going to get to that. We will get there. Hold your horses. Quick recap. Covenant 1, Noah, for all of mankind, thanks to Noah and his willingness to listen to God, his commitment side, and the world, for better or for worse, will be continuing for, especially at the time, an untold future. Covenant 2, Abraham, God begins by taking a select group of people. These are unrealized people, especially at the moment of the deal. And through these people, all of the world will now be blessed. You know, it's ironic that there's a widening and a narrowing. I guess it's all a matter of perspective and time, right? It is a larger group than Abraham had in his most influential moment, and still a larger group than even the children of Israel as they were led out of the land of Egypt, right? But it's still only a tiny nation in the global perspective of things. Yet this lineage, these promised chosen people, have had a global impact like none other. If it's not for them and they're passing on and protecting the Torah, we are not where we are today. You know, and I might add that that tiny stretch of land, the promised land of Israel, within the borders we have today, I know that there are schools of thought that say that's larger area, and I'll agree. But even then, even that tiny land is still one of the most contentious, fraught, full of turmoil piece of real estate on the planet. And it has been for millennium. Which brings us to Covenant 3. Oh, just be ready. Keep your mirrors handy. These people are a part, as in they still continue to exist today, right? And will in the future, are part of the promise of God to Abraham. See Covenant 2. And where we have the commitment on Abraham to raise that family, to commit to God, that time influence has long since passed for him directly, but maybe it is very still real today. So they are now, fair to say, in that time at Sinai, these children of the Exodus are the raw material to be a mighty nation. They are all the pieces of what will be, let's use a house analogy, the foundational structure of the will of God lived out and reflected to the nations. Israel, this gathering of people rescued from a land that God had brought them to, but now had turned hostile. How soon the past is forgotten. And so the Exodus commences. Catastrophe and trauma begin the journey. Maybe a bit of a Noah echo. Yeah? These children of Israel, who might have some semblance of who they are, but they're a far cry from the promised influencers that were envisioned by Abraham. These people were the material that would launch the next phase of God's will on earth. But to be a nation, still quite a bit missing. Land, structure, leadership, maybe even vision. So we have built to Covenant 3, Israel, and God meets them where they're at. And I might add, I guess a bit, that also happened to Noah and Abraham, right? That God gives them the next part of the building of this covenant structure, the bones of a nation, Torah. Inside of Torah, we have the promise of land, right? The land promised to their forefather. The structure needed to establish a safe community/nation. And the leadership defined within that structure. The Torah is, for all practical purposes, what we in our Western world would call a constitution. And one could stretch that a bit more, probably toss in a Declaration of Independence. So we're looking for the elements of commitment and promise. So it seems that the commitment part is ramping up a bit, as in there is more to be held accountable for in this covenant. More directive that is on our part. Notice I did intentionally say our part rather than their part. Remember, we started this with, we are part of this ongoing story. So this is our covenant lineage. The next part of the stack, another facet of the elephant. The commitment part, this time and their time it seems, comes with a set of instructions. We commit to God at the base of the mountain. And he continues to show and keep his commitment, shown through his promises anyways, to us. Yet now we have what I will say is probably up again for debate and discussion, what our rainbow will look like. So let's have fun. We commit to God and the promise to keep the instructions. Remember, that's land, structure, leadership. And this is what it'll look like. This, just like the rainbow, will be what the nations will see. What will be a light to the nations. What will define this land and the servants to the nations that inhabited it. This is what it can look like. Maybe this is what it's intended to look like. God promises to protect and bless, flourish the land, to guide the leadership, as long as we commit and promise to keep to the plan. We're seeing this slow yet deliberate shift, putting more on us to be a part of this covenant relationship, more than just the sprinkled about followers of this God. This God wants to bless the entire world and has a will, a purpose, and a plan to get us there. So both sides in this are very active on their commitments and their promises. This will take time, dedication, loyalty, obedience, integrity, honesty. I'll toss in love. So, show me an instruction that also does not fall in any of those. So let's ask a few tricky questions before we move on, maybe. Are any of those impossible? Too difficult? That we're not capable of? That God would set us up by saying, you could not have done all this from the get-go. You couldn't have done it, so I got to do it. Or are we, and have we even shown in our lives today, right? We seem to be non-committal, short-sighted, undedicated, disloyal, disobedient, lacking integrity, unloving. And also, whose part of the covenant was that? Ours. God, in his character from the beginning, has kept unequivocally the promises and commitments that he has made. All of them. So we get to covenant 4, David, right? That this covenant, to not want the world in ruin, to not want it to get to that point of destruction, will promise a Messiah. One from this line of David. Realize, don't forget, he was called by God, a man after my own heart, flaws and all, to refresh that covenant line, to keep the promise to Abraham intact, and the integrity to stick to the plan, to focus it. So Tim and John, they mentioned that the prophets tell the people that if they change their ways, repent and do not stray, that God will restore the covenants. I agree. The covenant line will be continued. Restoration implies an original. And it will be brought to its original glory. Think of restoring an old car. It was, but now it needs work. And it can be all that it was intended to be when it's restored to its glory and purpose. This is not a new car, as in it would be something that we might not even recognize, right? It has all of the trappings of the original. But now, for fun's sake of discussion, let's leave a possibility hanging out there. I'm just going to throw this out. This project would still be restored with new parts. So that, my friend, is the delicate balance between restoration and change. How different are the parts or material used? That's just more food for thought. So we get to the next part of this covenant stack. This restored, renewed, new covenant. Remember, I called it 5, right? The one with the promised Messiah. The one that through this line, starting with Abraham, drawing a line through David, right, we have the prophets and their help to clarify more, so there'll be no confusion about who Yeshua is. So now we begin our part of the covenant line, the fifth one. Kingdom covenant. This is a distinguished line of commitment and promise. I prefer renewed rather than new. Maybe it's to help remember that this covenant has a lineage. It was, and it will be again, or was, is, and will be again, shall we say. And if the trend is heading in the direction that it appears to be going, more will continue to be expected of us. So now we are in extremely different circumstances than those folks in the early covenants, for sure. The world is a very different place. At Mount Sinai, the instructions, as part of that covenant included specific land, tabernacle, leadership system. Could use the phrase government system. So much of those, it would seem, at least for the time being, are not in active status. We'll probably need to address that later. But we're not in the land. There is no tabernacle or temple. And that leadership system, on a land governing scale anyways, doesn't exist either. But that is only part of a much broader and more intimate part of the instructions. Really, how do we treat and relate to others? How are we to meet and relate to our God? So now we're listening to Yeshua's teachings and his references, things he's referring to, and he reminds us of the covenants, the lineage that he's a part of, that these are his chosen people, his lost sheep, both in the land and scattered abroad through the decisions of their forefathers. But he says that he has not come to abolish anything, so there's no ending. The contrary, to show us how to live our part, to be the example for our part. This kingdom covenant that he is declaring. An example. And at least, from what I understand, we are living out the story of that visit from the Messiah. And we're in anticipation, yes, even these 2,000 plus years later, of his return. But we are still believing in that commitment in the promises of God and his Son. And if that pattern of building the covenant stays on course, we need to embrace when he said that I'm not tossing the law, choice of word for instructions, that will continue to be on our plate. But are we as committed to God and our King Messiah as heir to us? And for the track record of their promises to us, what is our track record of promises to them? This is a very personal, intimate question. And one that like life presents itself in how we do the same to others. How are we now going to be, or are going to be, that light? Did you think there would be a covenant with no commitment and no promise from us? Do you think there'd be a yes, we will? We just might want to think again and seek that out. So, a point to ponder to end the night. Where's my ponder button? There you go. This one kind of connects itself to the light thing. And I think I hear the echoes of an instruction from Yeshua on love. Sometimes people are struggling silently. Maybe your act of kindness can make their day. Sometimes people are struggling silently. Maybe your act of kindness can make their day. Thanks, Toby Mac. Speak life. And thanks for being with us tonight on The Dusty Feet.